Hi, this is Paul Clements. I'm speaking with Ron Kramer, professor of sociology at Western Michigan University, and also a longtime member of Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War. Hey, Ron,
Hi, Paul.
tell us a
So,
little bit about KNOW.
sure. So, Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War formed in the fall of 2002. And at that time, we knew that the United States was preparing to carry out an invasion of Iraq. And we hoped to join with other peace groups around the country to try to prevent that invasion from taking place. And it was Joe Gump was one of our members and came up with the idea to call ourselves the Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War. And we did a lot of things in that time period before the war started, but ultimately we failed. the war, the war occurred. The invasion took place in March of 2003, but we stayed together. And I would say that KNOW focuses on three things. We try to oppose wars like the invasion of Iraq and other military interventions. We try to advocate for very drastic reductions in the military budget. And I'll talk a little bit more about the military budget in just a moment as it relates to climate change. But we really see the enormously wasteful expenses connected to the Pentagon budget as being a very severe problem in our society. And so we work to try to educate people about that budget and reduce the Pentagon budget. And the third thing that we do is to sort of analyze the influence of militarism in American society. And we try to expose or debunk that creeping militarization of almost all aspects of our lives and society. And there are a number of different cultural narratives connected to American exceptionalism and patriotism. And we try to analyze those things and to, in general, oppose not only war, but the militarization of our society. So those are sort of the main things that we tend to focus on. I tried to connect a lot of what I had worked with Kalamazoo Nonviolent Opponents of War to the climate issue in my book, Carbon Criminals, Climate Crimes. And in that book, I have a chapter called Climate Crimes of Empire. And there are three climate crimes of empire that I analyze in the book. One is the way in which U.S. wars and military interventions have often been to secure access to and control over oil, particularly in the Middle East. And so the Iraq War is a perfect example that there were many other factors, but controlling Middle Eastern oil was certainly a central feature of that war. And then we also, in the book, I also then analyzed the Pentagon itself as an important organization because the Pentagon consumes enormous quantities of fossil fuel. It has far-flung operations. It has military bases, so over 800 military bases around the world. And engaging in all kinds of training activities and fighting wars consumes enormous quantities of fossil fuels. And of course, that then generates carbon emissions, right? And so, in fact, the Pentagon probably consumes more fossil fuels than any other single organization in the world and is responsible for emitting more greenhouse gases than any other single organization in the world. So, in the book, I analyze Pentagon emissions as a form of climate crime of empire. The third thing that I do is to look at how, when we talk about adaptation to climate change, that can take place in two basic ways. One is fair, just, and progressive, especially for those who are victimized by climate change and have almost no responsibility for it, particularly in the global South. And then, of course, there's another way to adapt, and that is a militarized form of adaptation, right? And sometimes this is referred to as the politics of the armed lifeboat, right? We're in the lifeboat, we're safe and secure for the moment, but we're going to keep others, climate refugees and others who are suffering, out of the lifeboat at the point of a gun. And this is where the U.S. military comes in. The Pentagon is very concerned about the climate change issue. It sees it as a critical national security issue, but it tends to focus on how are we going to deal with climate refugees and how are we going to deal with disruptions that threaten U.S. security. And of course, they rely on military force primarily to do that. So again, militarized versions of adapting to climate change is the third form of climate crime that I focus on in the book. I would say in general, what KNOW has tried to do in recent years is to focus on an awful lot on the military budget, just to educate people on that budget. And of course, if we look at that budget, we find that the Pentagon is getting $650 billion a year plus. And if you add in Department of Energy spending on nuclear weapons and retirement benefits and veterans benefits, the military spending swells to around $1.2 trillion a year. $1.2 trillion a year. Now, we just had a big infrastructure package and everybody was talking about, oh my gosh, it costs $1.9 trillion. But we basically spend $1 trillion, over $1 trillion every year on military. That's almost none of which is necessary for any legitimate defense needs, but it's tied in, of course, to the effort at geopolitical dominance, military supremacy. It's tied into the U.S. empire. Hardly any of it is really tied into defending United States borders. So the Pentagon budget is a critical issue because, of course, this is a vast diversion of resources, right? A vast diversion of resources away from other needs that we have in our society, public needs, social needs, including dealing with the climate crisis, right? Now, some people who support Pentagon spending say, well, it creates jobs. Well, actually, it's a remarkably poor job creator. And I came up with one statistic from the Cost of War project at Brown University that nicely, I think, ties in the resource issue to climate change. Just a shift of $125 billion from the Pentagon budget. And remember, it's a budget over $650 billion a year and likely to grow. But if we shifted $125 billion from the military budget and invested it in alternative energy, it would result in a substantial increase in employment. In fact, the estimate is that it would be a net gain of 250,000 green jobs just from that one shift alone. And of course, we have other societal needs, healthcare, infrastructure. The Biden administration is talking about a big infrastructure bill right now. Of course, the pandemic response that we just talked about. So again, this is just wasteful. This is just wasted money that we're pouring into a rat hole of the Pentagon and the Pentagon. And we have so many other needs. So it's just madness. It's just sheer madness to be wasting this amount of money when we have so many other critical needs. And dealing with climate change certainly is right up there.
Well, I think for our Earth Day, we call it our Earth Day celebration, but it does involve coming to grips with these really fundamental critical issues of where we need just very basic change in the society to deal certainly with climate change and sustainability and so many other human needs in the society. So thank you so much, Ron, for speaking with us today.
Can I just add one more thing real quickly? And that is, I think we need to rethink national security, right? The Pentagon has defined climate change as a national security threat, but of course they define it in a very particular militaristic way. We need to rethink and redefine, have a more expansive view of national security, which includes dealing with global pandemics, which deals with dealing with climate disruptions. And in that sense, we really need to rethink our relationship with China, because increasingly we're hearing lots of saber rattling with regard to China, the idea of a new Cold War with China, an arms race with China. But really, we need to cooperate with China. We can't deal with the climate crisis unless we have a very cooperative relationship with China, unless these two countries are really working hand in hand to deal with the climate crisis. So we need to rethink national security. We need to rethink our foreign relationships with countries like China, and that's an important element of dealing with the climate crisis, I would argue.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Ron. And of course, it's always just, good to see an old friend again. Take care.
Thanks, Paul. Enjoyed it.